I feel like all of my discussions always boil down to just having trust and handing things over. Like that seems to be like no matter what I discuss, it always seems to like once I, get to the very bottom of the actual root of the problem, it's always that I'm not trusting enough.
Yeah, but they're such good discussions anyway.
Yeah. I don't know, Sammy, do you have anything you're working on?
I was going to say, and the fun part about the discussion, Sadie, is the figuring out what makes it possible for us to trust more.
Yeah, I was discussing that a little bit with like every, flaw or whatever comes up. I'm noticing that more and more. That's causing me to seek guidance from him even sooner.
Yeah.
So I've kind of slowly been embracing the flaws a lot more than I was at the beginning, or for a majority of my life. It was like, no, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine, whatever. And so you're not really fixing the problem or getting help to fix the problem. And then I think my perspective has changed a lot where I embrace that because that seems to bring me a lot closer to him. I talk to him a lot more.
Yeah, good.
That fits our discussion earlier.
Yeah.
I remember at one point I was in a stressful situation and I said, I'm not going to be like Eve. I'm not just going to dismiss my feelings. I'm going to say them out loud to you right now and get your guidance immediately.
Yeah, that's good.
Much better plan.
I've been thinking a lot on what would have happened if Adam had waited. What would have happened with Eve?
Yeah, that would have been an interesting scenario.
Well, I had first presented it to Barb and I had said, at one point, the angels and Lucifer would have been put back exactly where they were. They were welcome to come back, and Lucifer was welcome to be at his post again. And so then I wondered if that would have happened with Eve. Would God have worked with her? But then we got on the subject of Eve had already sinned. Like she had already, I guess, crossed the line, which I don't know if there is a line, but it's just, I've been trying to work through that, like,
Must be.
Frank had a question when we left, but that was the one we were going to save till next Sabbath, huh?
Yeah. Frank might have a different one though. He's on, isn't he?
Yeah.
Or Amber, maybe Amber's got something for us to work on. She's shaking her head no. No. I got nothing.
Amber, you didn't feel like we threw you under the bus last time, did you?
No, it was a fantastic. I loved the discussion. It was great.
Yeah, it was good. Ati's joined us. Maybe he's got something on his mind he'd like to bring up as a topic of conversation.
Well, yeah, we haven't seen Ati in a while. Hi, Ati.
He might have just come on, maybe.
Yeah, this verse is in Hebrew, in 2 Corinthians about the veil I'm still working on that one. That's pretty cool.
About what?
Well, in 2 Corinthians, the one Frank brought up about the veil over their blinds their minds. Their minds were blinded with a veil.
Mm-hmm.
The ending of that section is pretty cool.
Where 2 Corinthians what?
3. We should back up and start verse 12. Well, we could go back further. Go back to verse 7. But if the ministry of death, does everybody say that? So use the word death. But if
Where
the
are you, Bobby?
2 Corinthians 3,
Okay.
verse 7. But if the ministry of death, notice that it says written and engraved on stone. What is that?
Well, mine says the old way with laws etched in stone led to death.
Oh, it says led to death. Okay. So anybody else will say it a little different? But if the ministry of death, written and engraved on stone, was glorious, so that the children of Israel could not look steadily at the face of Moses because of the glory of his countenance, which glory was passing away. So apparently he's referring to it would come to an end. This glory of the old covenant, which was the ministry of death, would pass away. How will the ministry of the Spirit not be more glorious? For if the ministry of condemnation, which is the law, had glory, then the ministry of righteousness exceeds much more in glory.
Bobby, what did you say the glory was in verse 7?
It's talking about ministry of death, written and engraved on stones, which was the law.
Right, but isn't the glory that they're talking about, is that not the glory seen on Moses's face when he was radiating because of what he had seen?
Well, yes, but he's just making a connection that if God, when delivering the law, which would only bring the ministry of death, if that lit up Moses's face, and therefore we see this glory, how much more glorious would be the new covenant, so to speak, if we just summarize it, right? So it's just interesting that he's comparing glory with such a ministry about death as compared to how much more glory when it would be glory about life and love and redemption, right?
That's interesting because I always thought the glory was caused from him seeing God, like even though it was
It is.
the back.
It is, but the reason why he's connecting it this way is because Moses got to see the glory of God. The people didn't. The people had delivered to them the writing on tablets of stone, and what they saw as a remnant of the glory or a piece of the glory was what was shining on Moses' face, which is directly coming from God and his presence, right? But it's a tiny little sliver of the presence. And so he's just pointing out that, if there was that much glory that it flooded Moses's face, when it was really going to be about this delivery of the law, the old covenant, and so on, then how much more glorious is going to be when you see God himself, which is in Christ Jesus. Anyway, to get to the point here at the end, we'll keep going. How will the ministry of the Spirit not be more glorious? For if the ministry of condemnation, which was the law, had glory, then the ministry of righteousness exceeds much more that glory. For even what was made glorious had no glory in this respect, because of the glory that excels. For if what is passing away was glorious, what remains is much more glorious. So a lot about what's glorious and what's not glorious. Therefore, since we have this hope, here's the point. Therefore, since we have this hope, we use great boldness of speech. Unlike Moses, who put a veil over his face so that the children of Israel could not look steadily at the end of what was passing away. So they didn't want to see the full glory. They just wanted the law, is kind of what that's making reference to. They were happy to hear what God said, so we know what to do, right? Just tell us what he said, tell us what to do. But actually beholding the glory, they were afraid of that, turned away, and asked Moses to put a veil over his head, so he did. But their minds were blinded. For until this day, now he draws a parallel all the way to his time, meaning when Christ came. For until this day, the same veil remains unlifted, meaning it's still there, in the reading of the Old Testament or the Old Covenant, because the veil is taken away only in Christ. But even to this day, when Moses is read, a veil lies upon their hearts. And getting to the exciting part, nevertheless, when one turns to the Lord, which means away from the law and towards the Lord, the veil is then taken away. Now the Lord is spirit, and where the spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But we all, with unveiled faces, so there's your connection to Moses, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, or some translations say a dark glass, or something that can give only a representation. But we behold dimly the glory of the Lord, being transformed into the same image, into the image of Christ, from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord, which really wraps up the whole point of by beholding him we become changed, which is righteousness by faith. That's why I was so intrigued with rereading that this morning when Frank brought it up.
Yeah, mine on verse 18 says, so all of us that have had that veil removed can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. I like that.
Good. That's good. What version is that?
New Living Translation.
New Living. Yeah, that's good. There's a lot of good stuff in New Living.
Bobby, we were talking this morning about a little bit about the law and how it should be handled. I was wondering if what you think of the verse Jeremiah 3:16, and is that saying anything about the law, or is it something else?
Jeremiah 3.
Yeah, 3:16.
So let me read it out loud here. Then it shall come to pass when you are multiplied and increased in the land. So talking about when the Israelites got into the promised land. Whoops, pressed the wrong button. In those days, says the Lord, that you've moved into the promised land, that they shall say no more, the ark of the covenant of the Lord, quote unquote. It shall not come to mind, nor shall they remember it, nor shall they visit it, nor shall it be made anymore. At that time, let me read a little more. Jerusalem shall be called the throne of the Lord, and all the nations shall be gathered to it. To the name of the Lord, to Jerusalem no more shall they follow the dictates of their evil hearts. In those days, the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land and out of the north and out of the land that I have given as an inheritance to your fathers. So any other translations do something different with the part that's in quotes that says the ark of the covenant of the Lord.
Where are they?
My amplified version says the ark of the covenant of the Lord, it will not come to mind, nor will they seriously remember it, nor will they miss it, nor will it be made again. And then it adds, for instead of the ark, which symbolizes my presence, I will be present.
Yeah.
So I was thinking it was kind of referring to the time when God's people will be changed, but it's also maybe referring to a specific time regarding the actual ark and things that happened to it or whatever. So,
well, I think though that it's more along with what you were saying first, which the connection would be like if we take the idea of the promised land that was promised to Abraham, was it really dirt in Canaan? Or as Jones wrote in his sermon, was it about seeing the Lord, knowing the Lord? That was the promised land. That was actually the inheritance that was to be passed down from father to son, called the birthright, was a knowledge of the true God. So if that's the promised land, then certainly it would be from turning away from the symbolic versions and looking, as Paul is saying in Hebrews, into the face of Christ.
yeah.
And that other stuff called the law so often then fades away like little stick drawings or mechanical expressions of the real thing. Like once you have the real thing, the other can't be of near as much significance or interest.
Right. It won't even, well, how does it say it? It won't even remember it, nor will they miss it.
Right. Oh, is that what your version says? They won't
Yeah, mine
miss it?
says, nor they won't remember it, nor will they miss it.
Will they miss it? Wow, that's interesting.
Anyway, I thought it was interesting that that's kind of an Old Testament reference to what Paul seems to be talking about so much in Romans and Galatians when he's discussing the law.
Yeah, same thing.
So.
Well, that's why I was curious if anybody else has used something different than the Ark of the Covenant, like just the covenant or the law or anything else other than that.
Well, the covenant was the old law.
Right, it was the whole law, and
Yes.
the ark was like the big symbol of it.
Mm-hmm.
That they carried it around in.
Yeah. Right.
So why would you need it when you have Christ, when you have God right there?
Yeah, you wouldn't. That's
the same today. What John was just saying, and you were saying, if we have God and He's dwelling in our heart, why would we need it?
So it's kind of interesting then to think about from our Adventist heritage. So what's the significance of going back and re-resurrecting, and I'm being a little bit facetious, but re-resurrecting, say, the whole sanctuary doctrine and the whole having to go back to the law. That's worth figuring.
It was, there was a false direction in doing away with the law, a false gospel that came out of that. And maybe that's partially what they were combating, but then they, as in all instances, they ended up going too far. And you were quoting Sister White's when you said the law, because she's the one that said that, and she said we need more of Christ, right? So
yeah, she said, I wish we were no longer known as the people who preach the law, and know not Christ.
Well, I think a lot of that of the old Adventists though was from like 60s and 70s, where you had this bad definition of love starting coming out, and so that's why I think they kind of veer towards more that direction. And it's kind of sad, but I think that's what it was about.
Well, yeah, so you're referring to where it was more of about a sexual free-for-all and love,
right,
instead of defining love correctly.
Yes.
So each and if we go backwards, there's always something like that. Like, for instance, an obvious one is in the Dark Ages, the term Jesus Christ was connected to terrible things like hell and eternal torment, and a God who somehow delighted in beating up on his son and watching his son, go through this terrible torment and torture, and then obviously must really enjoy it if his followers, like the monks, or whoever, would beat themselves and whip themselves so they could partake in the sufferings of Christ. All of this was connected just to the term Christian or Jesus Christ. And so now you've got a full false version of Jesus going on in that whole thing, right? So what would be the usefulness then of, sort of going back to what these verses almost, I think it's now warning us, hey, don't go back to that so much, right? Meaning the Ark of the Covenant, the Old Covenant, the law.
I think what they should have did is they should have redefined it as selfishness versus selflessness. I think it would have been better that way. I think it would have kept the Adventists on track.
Okay, good.
I may be wrong.
What else? Anybody else got a thought on that?
Well, I mean,
Did you say that it would have kept the Adventists on track if we had worded something differently?
I think so, because I think what happened is they went away from, because during the 60s and 70s, unfortunately, there's this free love thing going out there. So they didn't like to use the word love, and they went to law. And I think if they changed it a little bit differently, because then by going to the law, unfortunately, the Adventists, to a lot of other denominations, came modern day Jews. And what they should have did is said, no, we need to be more Christ-like, more selfless, other-centeredness. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
But isn't it by them going to the law instead of love, isn't that showing that they had the wrong idea of love in the first place?
Oh, I'm not arguing that.
He's just saying it would be more helpful if we define it as Christ-like versus selfish instead of so obsessed with law.
Yeah.
And really, it wasn't just the 60s and 70s. I mean, that's where we had the sort of free sexual love thing. But earlier in the 1800s, when we were at 1888, we were having the same problem, just over arguments about law versus grace, right?
Well, and there's a lot of, I think a lot of that was power too, unfortunately, which is selfishness.
Right.
So a lot of people wanted the power of their office, and it's kind of sad seeing that.
Well, I think what's cool is just to realize that we could take the entire Old Testament, as the Jews did, and have a completely corrupted view of God. But then in the 2,000 years after Christ, we see that you can take the entire New Testament and have a completely corrupt view of God. So I think that the point of, say, bringing our minds back to, let's just call it sanctuary, Old Testament sanctuary, was to allow the two to be in a little bit of contention, meaning Old and New Testament, so that we'd have to work out how they fit together, how the balance goes, and so that we would have to see, well, sanctuary can't just be about righteousness by works, because New Testament talks too much about grace and faith, but grace and faith can't be just about free love or free sexual love or whatever, because there has to be some definition of morality or right and wrong. And so by causing us to have to start working that discussion of the two together, it would lead down the track of almost, I hate using the word balance, but let's just call it blending the two together to understand first the role of law and Old Covenant, and therefore the need for New Covenant, right? But too often we have gotten stuck for a while in thinking that, well, let's run away from the New Testament. Like everybody knows the stories about Jesus, so we won't talk about that. Let's talk about law. Let's talk about, Sabbath rules. Let's talk about, and we got way bogged down in sort of legalism that way.
Yeah, modern day Jews.
Modern legalism.
So
we were we're modern Jews with a Jesus necklace.
With a Jesus.
So what about Revelation 22:14, which says, "Blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter through the gates into the city. But
So what?
outside are dogs," if you keep going to 15, "are dogs and sorcerers and sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters and whoever loves and practices a lie."
Right. So if we stop and just say, okay, when we heard the word in that verse, commandments, what did we hear? What is it?
Well, it says his commandments,
Okay. So
and
what?
we know the his is Jesus, and his commandment was to love one another as I have loved you.
Okay,
think
I see 15. What did you just read before that, John?
14. Blessed are those who do his commandments. Revelation 22,
Wow.
14, and 15.
Mine doesn't say that at all.
Yeah. What does yours say?
Mine says, "Blessed are those who wash their robes. They will be permitted to enter." So to me, mine says it's a changing.
But that's
So
still the same thing.
Yeah, it
yeah,
is the same thing, but it's different wording, and I agree with Frank that the one is I don't know. Well, wash your robes. I mean, who's doing the
yeah, it
washing?
sounds like you're doing something, right? Yeah, I know.
Well, yes, but the reason it's valuable to put those two together, again, that's where I was going with the question. If we hear, blessed are those who do the commandments, and we hear the 10 commandments as if that's it, then you're going to automatically work hard at trying to define those 10, put up protections and hedges to keep you from breaking those 10. That whole mentality that I talk about that I had, which was, hey, well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm keeping 9 of them. I just got to work on one more, right? That's automatically what we hear until you read wash the robes, and then we're going to get to what he really means by keep the commandments. Because washing the robes is about being healed, being changed, filling you with the character or spirit of the law, which you did say it correctly, John. His commandment was, love your neighbor as yourself. So love fulfills the whole law. It brings it right back to that. So you're talking about blessed are those who have learned to love the way Jesus loved. Well, that's much clearer to us than when we just say commandments, because we think that's a list of either 10 or 55 or 452, or even when we do it with just the one, we still can have that mental approach of, here are those who know the list and do it, versus here are those who have been transformed to be filled with the spirit of the law.
So I guess the point I'm getting to is that the Bible doesn't pull punches. It does give warning. It does say things like, "Don't you know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of heaven?" Right? So I think what I'm trying to get back to the original question, or one of the beginning questions, which was, why did the Adventists focus on the law in the beginning? Because, I mean, I wholeheartedly love to read Ellen White's writings, and she spends a whole lot of time talking about God's law and how important it is. That's me paraphrasing. But she does talk about it a lot. And then she's also the one who said we should no longer be the people who preach the law, right? So there was a need, I think, if we just want to look at this from a historical perspective, there was a need to bring the law back out on the table at one point in our history. The problem is why was that need there, and when did we step over the bounds to make it something it shouldn't have been.
Yeah, and I'm looking at that what you just said, John,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm still looking at 14 and 15, and they're almost polar opposites. Where 14 is other-centeredness because we now have Christ in us. The other is self-centeredness.
Right.
And if you look at the law, there's nothing in the law that says me. The first 4 commandments are about God. The last 6 are about others.
Right. How
And
you
if you
treat
look
other
at verse
people.
12,
Yep.
Huh?
if you read verse 12 says, my reward is with me to give everyone in according to his work.
Right.
And then it says commandments, and then the sexually immoral, it goes through what those works are. So maybe it's just describing the 2 different people, but ones that have had Christ's character written on their hearts are going to follow his commandments. The ones that don't are going to be the ones outside.
That's too
And
simple.
yeah, it's too simple. Again, I think I don't think. See, the thing is that what we can't say when we're busy trying to make sure that people aren't trying to use the law to save themselves, which is really what we're trying to help people with when we teach righteousness by faith, is that they have to understand that the law has no ability to save them, right? There's no remedy in the law. However, that isn't doing away with the law, right? That isn't doing away with the fact that there is a need to be changed and that the law is good. There's nothing bad about the law.
And that's where
What's bad is how we interact with it.
Yeah, John, that's where I have to argue against you on that one. But this is for next Sabbath, and the remedy of the law was in the middle of the law, which was Sabbath.
Right.
Which we've still done a wonderful job at turning totally into righteousness by works.
Yes, we have.
Yep.
So I
sure.
think that part of what you're saying, John, and I, it's good you reiterated the question, because that was the question. And I think it's because of this, the pattern of redemption. If we look at, so they're in Egypt, that's, confused, darkness, deceived, deception. Okay. And step 1 was to rescue them out of there and then give them the law, knowing full well they would not relate to it correctly. But there's no way around this. It's not like, we could skip over this. Because only through the experience of reading or hearing the law, promising to do it, and then utterly failing, would there ever really be a way for them to connect both in the heart and intellectually with the new covenant? So we see Jesus following that pattern with the rich young ruler, who says, what good thing must I do? The trick is in the question. He didn't say, what do I need to know, or who do I need to know? He said, what good thing must I do? Right. And so Jesus runs with the fact that, okay, he's needing the old covenant heaped on him with the full weight. The old covenant. Did I say that? The old covenant with the full weight. So he basically crushes him with the full weight of the old covenant, hoping the man would say, if this is the case, then who can be saved? Then we could hand him the new covenant. But Jesus understood you can't take somebody who's, say in Egypt or pre-old covenant, or even just partially into the old covenant, and bring them across the stream to the new covenant until they've been completely crushed with the old. So I think part of it is that, yes, we have in the history, dark ages, total confusion about the New Testament. And now God says, okay, what you guys need is the law, knowing all we could do with that is turn it into reactivating the old covenant. And then the question is, how long would it take for us to feel wiped out, burnt out, and crushed by the old covenant before finally we'd go, Lord, is there anything we're missing here? And then he could go, yeah, you kind of need the new covenant now.
Yep. See, that's, I don't know. I've looked at this enough to see that the beauty in that history, because, and you've stated it very well. One of the things you can actually see it in our church history. the two images, and you've seen this, Bobby. The first image made by James White, and this is at the beginning of the ministry of the church and of the movement, and that was this image that they had commissioned, and it had the tree of life, and it had all these different things that preachers could reference, and the 10 Commandments was like the biggest piece on the whole image. It like took up the center of the image and everything. But as the church progressed and studied and grew and was learning, they came to the realization that they'd made the picture wrong. And so they recommissioned to have the picture redone. And now the cross and Christ was the biggest piece in the middle of the center of the photo, and the 10 Commandments was just kind of hanging off on the side somewhere, right? It's a much smaller piece.
In fact, it's not even there.
Yeah, it may not be. It may have just been like the Ark of the Covenant or something was a piece of the photo.
It was a mountain way in the background that represented Sinai.
Yeah. Anyway, point being, it actually visually demonstrated the journey that the church took in its understanding, or at least that James White and Ellen White took in their understanding. So
yeah, because a lot of it was James who had the first picture commissioned, and he was really struggling with it after a while, and he was trying to figure out how to fix it, and then that's where the second picture comes from. I was wondering if you had those where you could throw them up on the screen.
oh man, I might be able to find them with a good search on Google.
Yeah, search James White, uh, painting of the law. See what comes up. I used to have those, but I don't know what I did with them.
Yep, I got them both here. So
Oh, good.
let's see. Share screen. I think I can actually just share a portion of screen. So, you guys see this one?
No, show us the first one first. Oh.
Oh, that's the second one, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah, show us the first one first.
All right, let me switch it here. Okay, here's the first one.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, you've got the whole system, and the preacher would, stand there with his little stick or whatever, and he'd point at this thing or that thing, and you've got Cain and Abel, and you got them getting kicked out and guarded by the angel with the sword. Excuse me. And there's Jesus and the baptism, and there's the New Jerusalem in the background, the tree of life with the 10 Commandments hanging right there front and center.
Well, the commandments are more prominent even than Jesus.
Right. Yeah. So then later on, they commissioned this one. And yeah, you're right, Bobby. It's not really even there anywhere.
You got the mountain up in the upper left corner, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's still the Cain and Abel. There's still them. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know that I'd noticed that the shadow of the cross goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. That's interesting. Also, is that the New Jerusalem with
on the
gates
right?
Open?
Yep.
Oh, that's interesting. And were they closed in the other one? Yeah, you can't really tell. Huh. Anyway. Just an interesting little piece of history and how the knowledge of it progressed over time. So yeah,
Well, I think it's important to understand, because even when you're working with people today, let's say they're just a brand new beginner, don't know much about scripture at all, you're still going to go through the same, they're going to go through the same exact sequence. You can't really just jump them straight to the new covenant. It's not really very possible.
mm-hmm.
We think of, the thief on the cross, and he hardly knew anything. Yeah, but the guy grew up in the old covenant. He grew up with the Jewish law. So he had spent his whole life under that. And then he saw Jesus for a moment, and it fixed everything, right? So when you're working with somebody, they're going to go through the same thing, and that is to struggle a little bit with the law, and even fall into the temptation of sort of righteous by, or salvation by, law keeping, before they can really correctly move into the balance or the freedom that Paul refers to of the new covenant. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't mean that everybody we meet we have to watch them go through that entire sequence. Some may have gone through most of it before we met them. I'm just saying that if they haven't gone through Phariseeism and righteousness by works, they can't truly really get to the new covenant very well. They can grow up learning the lingo of it, but they will still tend to be doing legalism, but they won't really know that they are.
Yeah.
Or baptized pagans.
Yeah.
Well, any other thoughts from anyone? These times when we don't have a planned topic are open topic, open questions.
I like.
In
Oh, go ahead.
I in kind of goes with both this morning's and this afternoon. Romans 4 verse 13 through 15. For the promise that he would be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, faith is made void, and the promise has no effect. And here's the one. Because the law brings about wrath or separation, for there is no law, where there is no law, there is no transgression. I was thinking of that as we were doing the Revelation one. So
Yeah, is that the thing that some people struggle with is the doing away with the law, and then you end up with just this, I don't know, free-form Christianity where everything goes and do whatever you want and don't worry you're saved and that kind of thing?
I think so.
And that's what he's saying there. Where there is no law, there is no transgression.
Well, I don't think that's what he's saying there, but I think that's how people are taking it.
Right.
Or how it has been taken.
Romans 4 what?
4 verses 13 through 15. It's 4 verse 15.
Yeah, Paul sometimes has funny ways to get to the conclusion. Did Abraham finally have a child because of law or because of the seed? Well, I think if we learn to teach it effectively, could you teach the correct understanding of law and the correct understanding of righteousness by faith and the correct understanding of salvation without ever using the Ten Commandments?
Sure.
Yeah.
Isn't that what God tried to do in the Garden of Eden? The 10 Commandments weren't available that wasn't a thing then.
Can you repeat that question, Bobby?
Sure. Could you teach the correct understanding of the law or God's character, rules, law, spirit, all of that? And could you teach righteousness by faith and what's really supposed to happen to us in the process of salvation without ever using the Ten Commandments?
Isn't that what happened? Great controversy.
Oh, I want to hear Shady's question, but it's cutting out.
Didn't even know the Ten Commandments.
There, try again, Shady. We heard that. Start over.
Isn't that what was in heaven before the great controversy? The angels couldn't understand why the Ten Commandments even needed to be written.
Okay, good. If we take from Ellen White, she says that Satan or Lucifer brought up the issue of something wrong with the law, and they were trying to figure out why we even have a law. So yeah, that's a good, interesting question on the point. But if you were going to teach solid biblical righteousness by faith from the Bible, can you do it without using the Ten Commandments?
Well, you could use Christ's teachings for sure. If you're just excluded from Exodus 20 or whatever, for sure, because Jesus was teaching the law the whole time.
So, is there any part of the Ten Commandments that we could teach that we couldn't teach just from observing Christ? Whether it's his words or his actions or his whole life. Is there any of the Ten Commandments that we wouldn't be able to teach, explain without using the Ten Commandments and only using the life of Christ?
Well, based off of
Nope.
everything hangs off of the commandment of love God. And if you truly understand that and do that, you're going to do every commandment that's there, then some. No, because that's what he showed is how to love.
Good. So he actually showed us a much clearer picture of what we refer to as law than the Ten Commandments do. So I'm kind of, the reason I'm asking the question is I'm wondering, why are we so afraid or panicked about not being able to teach the truth without using the Ten Commandments, like in every seminar we do and every, you know what I mean? It seems like if we taught love based on Christ's life and all his teachings, you would have the whole entire thing without ever referring to the law. Isn't that why
Well,
Paul is so comfortable with saying you need to come out from under law?
yeah, and preach Christ and Christ alone.
Right.
I mean, come on, if you actually think about it. So here's the interesting thing that popped into my head as you were saying that is, okay, so if I take the Ten Commandments and I just go, okay, here's a list of do's and don'ts. I'm going to work really hard at making sure I don't do this and that, and that I do this other thing. You could potentially convince yourself that you'd kept them, almost like the rich young ruler, right?
Right.
But then you run into Jesus. I don't know, but he's actually 100 times tougher with
Higher
the
of a
law. I mean, he's putting the weight of the law on even heavier, not lighter. When he says things like, you know, anyone can love those who love them, but I say, love those who hate you and despitefully use you and do all manner of evil against you. Whoa, wait a minute. And then he says things like, yeah, you say that if you just don't kill anyone, you're doing pretty good. But I say, if you hate someone in your heart, you've murdered them. Oh, wait a minute. It just got harder again. It's like he was really good at that, putting the weight of the law on people. And yet, in the process of doing it, he actually showed the heart of God and allowed us to see the goodness that is the law, the beauty of the law actually practiced. You know, when he protected the woman who was thrown at his feet, when he saved those who couldn't save themselves, healed those who couldn't heal themselves, lived completely and totally for other people. That is the law in practice. And it's beautiful when you look at him. But did he make it somehow easy or take away the weight of the law? No, I'm saying he added weight big time.
I think I would disagree with you. I think he added weight for those who were trying to do the law. That when he points out the law, that what you just read, that it only makes it harder for the person who is trying to do the law. But for the person who understands the character of God, he's saying it right. If it makes it easier, actually.
Okay, but let me ask you this. What person around him was living any other way except for thinking that they had to keep the law? Even the
None of them, but
prostitute.
that was his goal.
Right. Even the prostitute thrown at his feet, she thought she was doomed because she had been taught that it was all about her ability to not be bad, to keep the rules.
So let me press the question a little further, John, because I
Yes.
agree with what you're saying, that Jesus is, let's call it, the clarity of standard goes way up from a little tiny list of 10. So if someone came to you or to us and said, I really want to learn the law of God, the 10 Commandments, should we be comfortable in responding with, you can read about that, but that's only going to produce death. So how about we learn the law here, and then we go straight to what Jesus said about character of God and things like love your enemy instead of hating your enemy, and totally avoid the table of stone. Any
Yeah.
problem?
No, I have no problem with that. In fact, I've seen it in action and I see its effectiveness. So yeah.
Well, and your effectiveness is proven by
I agree
Jesus.
with you, John, because I agree too, because we are already living a life of death. So I think these people want to hear a different type of life, a life of love, a life of eternal love, of other-centeredness. I think people want to hear that.
They need to
Because
hear.
we are already living a life. Yeah, we're already living a life of death.
Yeah,
But you
so then
would be teaching the law if you were teaching Christ.
right, but can we do it without making that clarification? Like, can we
Yep.
even avoid calling it law?
We should.
Because I really think that's what got Paul so gutsy to be so clear as to say, hey, law, bad. What you need is the Spirit of Christ. What you need is the Holy Spirit. What you need. And so he was, because the law had become so completely this overwhelmingly ministry of death, he just said, oh, okay, let's just go by how everybody approaches it and views it. And we're going to say, yeah, you're not going to find anything there. So quit looking over there. Come over here and look at Christ, right? And that's why he says, Christ and him crucified. I'm going to preach only Christ and him crucified. And we're still busy saying, well, no, hold on. We got to help Paul out because we need to preach the law. And then we read his writings and we struggle so hard to, Paul, what are you talking about? Because we're just sure that can't be explaining it right. He's making it very confusing because we're busy trying to be the modern day Jews, as Frank said, or the people who were really obsessed with the law.
And that's funny because Paul even said, I mean, when you were talking about that, he even said, I am a Pharisee.
Right.
You know, and he goes, I don't want to be that way anymore.
Right. He said, I did that. I'm done. I don't want to do that anymore.
So what I want to, again, I guess maybe I'm trying to figure out how to word this. So what we're not doing is not warning people. There is a warning in what we're saying. This isn't just only show the happy-go-lucky Jesus either, because Jesus did give the warnings. He was straight with the truth. I'm not saying he was mean about it or unloving about it. I'm saying, well, Isaiah says, woe to you who, what is it? It's like Isaiah 3 something. I'm going to look it up here.
While you're looking, John,
Yeah.
I agree with you, but I think that has a lot to do with our life. These are facts of life. If we keep living this way, this is going to happen to me, or that is going to happen. And I see it. You know, I'm older now, so I can see it. I'm not as young and dumb as I once was, but I see through bad choices, and I'm not saying that I need to make good choices. In other words, it's not, golly, how do you word this properly? Where it's not self-righteousness, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
We can use people's lives to lead them to a better one. I don't know if I'm saying that right, because I don't know if it's coming out right, because my mind, what I'm thinking in my mind, and sometimes the way the words are coming out, it doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I understand that issue. I do it all the time. I don't know. Isaiah really, like right here, he's kind of laying it out pretty simple and plain. Woe to the wicked, and let's see, Isaiah 3:9. The look on their countenances witnesses against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom. They do not hide it. Woe to their soul, for they have brought evil upon themselves. Say to the righteous that it shall be well with him, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. Woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hands shall be given him.
Wow, you know what that sounds like, John? That sounds like that Revelation 22 that we just mentioned. 14.
Yeah. Right. Or what's the saying? You know, whatever you sow, you reap.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what it sounds like he's saying there, very simply. But even people who are caught in their sin, right? can reach out to the Lord in desperation or in a realization of their need.
But we all are all there. That's what I'm saying.
Right, of
So
course,
yeah,
but not all are aware of their need.
right. And I did post something in the text there about spiritual things. The people that don't have the Spirit or are not searching for it count that as foolishness.
Mm-hmm.
So even though we can bring it to them, sometimes it may not be the time.
Mm-hmm.
My people are going to need a master wayfinder.
Someone's trying to share something with us and we're not listening.
I think it's Ati. Or maybe one of his kids got a hold of the phone. Oh, just got muted again.
I think the reason I'm just working on this in my own mind is that I think because of our early training, our upbringing, we have need of going the rest of the way with Paul. While others out there, maybe in their training, need to have some clarity that bring the purpose of the warnings. Like, it's not just a cheap grace or free for all or God will save everybody whether they want to be saved. None of that stuff. And so they might need some clarification on the difference between the fruits of the Spirit and the fruits of the flesh, let's say. But I think for us to practice on how to say it without ever referring to law or 10 commandments is kind of where and I'm thinking of a teaching need, not because our understanding is messed up. We're figuring this out and learning. I'm talking about how to talk to them out there.
Yeah.
Because our track record in history, short as it is, meaning Adventists, we are still very well known as the people who teach righteousness by works, teach salvation by the law, Old Covenant, and to be able to say unapologetically what Paul said, the way he said it, our history, our training almost wants to talk us out of that. Like, well, no, but we got to be sure and explain what Paul didn't mean was, right? Why not just say what he said in the whole of Hebrews or say what he said in the whole of Romans? Well, he said it perfectly already. We just are pretty sure that we've got a better way to say it. And so we end up kind of confusing everybody out there about the role of the law, the purpose of the law, the need of the law, the law.
I think part of it is we, as a church, we've fallen into this need to justify ourselves constantly in light of other denominations, doctrines, and so on. And I think when we were accused of being a cult is maybe a starting point for that. Although, it could have been before that, I don't know. But this idea that we're constantly trying to doctrinally justify the Sabbath and why we keep the Sabbath and all of that, in comparison to Sunday keeping, as we call it, right? And so even in that, we're not really teaching the Sabbath as it should be taught. We're too busy just trying to defend our existence as a denomination, which is really a trap that keeps you away from sharing the gospel as it could be and should be shared.
That's why I think it's a good challenge for us to exercise our mind on how to teach let's call it the principles of the law by basing it entirely on the life of Jesus instead of on Exodus 20.
Yeah.
It's a good mental challenge. And as well as reading, over and over again what Paul is saying and go, yeah, that's really good what he said that way. We need to say it that way. And say things like, if you're under the law, you're under the curse.
Yep.
Because it's interesting
That's
to
for
me.
sure.
It's interesting to me that those comments that Jesus made or statements he made about needing to keep the law, they weren't to the Samaritans. They weren't
Right.
to the Romans ever. It was always to the self-righteous Jew. So
the ones who thought they were doing it.
right, exactly. So the Jews would have said, wow, if we're going to help those Samaritans, man, we really got to teach them the law. All
Yeah.
450, whatever of them there were. Whereas Jesus went in there, and we have no record of him teaching that, but he for sure was teaching them about the kingdom of God and God's desire to rescue them, bless them, save them, all of that, which was teaching them the correct law. He just didn't use that term. So I think that's kind of the mental exercise I'm thinking of myself is, you know, when someone, for instance, knocks on your door, or you're in a circle somewhere, and they say something that sounds like the law was changed, done away with, or something. Do we know how to interact with that to place properly in front of them the value of the spirit of the law or the character of God, without making any argument about the Ten Commandments still being in full force? Right? Do we even know how to do that?
Well, it is something, if we don't know how, we should learn. And I can tell you this, that the more time you spend just learning at the feet of Christ, reading about him, learning the stories about him, his parables, dare I say, reading Desire of Ages, when you come into contact with people who have questions, it's wonderful. So I don't think Kenny's on right now, so I can say this and not embarrass him or anything, but when he reached out to me, it was random, and he just reached out. He said, "Hey, I'm gonna come visit you." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." So he came over. He started telling me interesting stories, and the topic came up about God and questions he had about God, and all I did was just start telling him stories about Jesus and how amazing Jesus is, and weaved in a little bit of the 4-part series, my understanding of God's wrath now and what that really means. And he became interested, and not once did I have to bring up the 10 Commandments. People are attracted to Christ when he's rightly presented. And I don't know. That's just my plug for what you're saying, Bobby. It's actually effective.
Yeah.
I do have I don't know. I'm just thinking about what Bobby said about when someone brings up, well, the law was done away with. And so how when someone, but they wouldn't say that unless you brought up the law. That's my thing.
Well,
but if they do bring it up,
let's say that let's say,
okay,
Frank, that someone else brought it up in a different conversation.
okay.
And so now they're just asking you, what do you think about this?
I would go, I truly believe the law is done away with if you're walking in the footsteps of Christ.
Yeah. That'd be a good one. It's what I'm talking about, the comfort of being able to say what Paul said, which is, oh yeah, the law was done away with. You're not going to find any salvation through the law, but you will find salvation through Christ and Christ alone, right? Is that really true? I think that's exactly what Paul is saying.
Would it be fair to say that you're no longer under the curse of the law? Would that be a more accurate statement, or do we need to just say the law?
Well, I'm getting comfortable with just letting them, because all over the place you'll notice Paul just says law, and then you're trying to figure out, well, is that the ceremonial or the moral, or all those discussions we go, and yet the Bible, especially in the New Testament, keeps just referring to everything that came before from Sinai to Christ as the law.
Yeah.
And so
that's all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm starting to wonder. I'm looking at it more and more as though, yeah, Paul did not care whether you were referring to the 10 Commandments, the Ark of the Covenant, the symbols of the sanctuary, or the slaying of a lamb. It was all the law. And what he's saying is, no matter what, if you go to the law, you will be under the curse of the law. What you need is Christ, which he knew. If we don't say the rest of it.
Right. But yeah, you ought to remember, Paul also never did say the law was bad. He said it was good.
Right. So if I know it's good,
Right.
I don't even have to say it to them, right? I can say the law will bring you only death. What you need is Christ, because here's who Christ is. And now we're all into the character of God discussion. And here's what he wants to put in you, which we're really saying the law without saying that word, right? So to me, that's what I mean is that I'm finding that we can actually go right into teaching that whole thing with allowing the weight or the focus to come off the Ten Commandments and go entirely onto Christ, which is all Paul was really doing.
Right. And but you have to also remember who you're talking to. Let's say if you're talking to an Adventist, you may have to bring up the law. If you're talking to a Jew, you will definitely have to bring up the law. But at the same time, all of us should be focused to bringing them to Christ.
Which is why I think it's interesting that Jesus, in talking to the Jews, he put the weight on the law pretty heavy for them if they're like the ruler. So if I'm talking to an Adventist, I really need to raise that law so high that they're feeling crushed under that thing, or they can't even hear what we're going to say about Christ, right?
Correct.
I think that's super important.
Go ahead, Amber.
To distinguish that actually has, in this whole conversation, all I can think of is, in my experience, I have not had great experiences trying to explain everything you guys have just said to Adventists who very much believe in the law, because it doesn't matter what you say or how you say it. They're only hearing one thing, and I'm thinking of Christ, and he lived it, he showed it, he breathed it, everything it was perfect, and yet the people who were supposed to know the law the best still didn't get it. Still, they were the ones that resisted it the most. And so I think that's a very, very good point, that the way that we should look at it is, for those type of people, they do need to be crushed under the law, because they will not accept the other. What I get from it is, or what I have heard back is, you can't remove the law. We would have lawlessness. We would have people. You can't do that. And
all the tapes in.
Huh?
Yeah, all the tapes just kick into overdrive.
Yeah.
At the same time, what you're saying is true. In the early part of the ministry of Christ, in other words, for the Jews, he did make references to the law, especially when they were self-righteous, like the rich young ruler. Peter, James, and John, he didn't.
Well, he didn't need to with them.
Let's just take the hardcore self-righteous ones. Even though that's true, he would put that weight and allow that to crush them. It was after they still were rejecting all that Paul then comes along and he writes Hebrews, which was written to the Jews, right? It was specifically for them, and basically took the entire law and rips it in pieces and says, you guys, all you're going to come up with that is death. You got to get off that, right? And then hopefully they'd go, and what? Get on to what? And then he could add the rest of what he's saying. But anyway, so there is, timing-wise, and this is where, if you're teaching or helping someone learn, then the timing led by the Holy Spirit will help you know, okay, at this moment, when they bring up law and we detect, well, they're really proud of their law keeping, so now we need to actually boost that higher, bigger, right, versus trying to take it away. And then when they go, oh man, if that's the case, none of us are going to be saved. All right, now we could shift over into, but if you go to the towns of the Samaritans, we don't need to start with the big ceremony, what do you call it, a presentation on why we're the only ones keeping all 10 commandments. That's really where I'm like, this has been travesty that we're doing this.
There was
so let me just say real quick, John, then you guys can keep talking. So here's the challenge for next week, Frank, because on the 1031, because I think that earlier when I asked a question, which I'm referring mostly to those of us that were born and raised Adventist, could we teach the whole law without ever referring to the Ten Commandments? I think the one that we generally have the hardest time with, because we say, oh yeah, we can teach, love God and love your neighbor and all that right from Jesus. But we say, yeah, but we need the Ten Commandments to teach which one? The fourth.
Sabbath.
Fourth. And so we got.
You mean the only one? You mean the only one that came before the Ten Commandments ever given?
Exactly. So I think so. Next week's
wrong. That's why.
Right. So next week's fun challenge for 10:30 session will be how to present, how to understand maybe first, and then present and explain Sabbath without referring to the Ten Commandments. Can we actually teach?
Well, Frank's going to be teaching, so I'm
What?
hoping he can pull it off.
Wait.
Yeah, Frank said next week. So that was good what you said, Amber.
Well, that was off of what you said. That was an aha moment of, because in my head I was just shaking my head going, I've done this doesn't work. And then you said the crushing of the law, the weight of the law, and I'm like, oh, that makes such perfect sense in this situation. So yeah.
I was reminded of something that Graham Maxwell said in regards to what the cross accomplished. I hope I don't butcher this too bad, but he actually has a fairly long list of what the cross accomplished. That a lot of them were things I hadn't even considered, but one of them was the revelation that you could be a Sabbath keeping, health reforming. He goes on to list all these things. Tithe paying, right? And still murder God, right? So that was one of the things that was revealed at the cross. And, there's some deep thinking truth in just that statement. While it might seem like it's just an attack on even Adventism, or for sure it's an attack on legalism, it should bring up the question, what then is it that we need? And hopefully that's what we don't lose in any of these conversations, is what is it that we need? Jesus said to Nicodemus that he needed to be born again. We need to have the Spirit of Christ, the Holy Spirit, in us. We need to be born of the Spirit. Need to be new men, as Paul would say. So,
yeah, I think what you're pointing out there that Maxwell is saying, that's a clear expression of the curse of the law.
yeah.
That is the curse of the law.
Yep.
You can read it, get it all lined up, and then try to crucify the Son of God.
Yeah, it didn't. In fact, what's interesting, it didn't create righteousness in them. It actually created the opposite.
Right.
It created really, and not only unrighteousness, it created an unrighteousness that was hidden in shadows and hiding behind self-righteousness, to where they're so maxed. And I think, Jesus used the term hypocrite. And if you think about it, it's the one thing that he seemed to really go after pretty strongly with the church of his day, was hypocrisy and the woes to the Pharisees. And the question is, why? Why, of all the things that were wrong around him, was that the one thing that he focused on? And my conclusion to that question is, because it's the most difficult position to be in to ever be able to find the truth or to be reborn.
Or to go even further, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, to go even further, to do anything without God is a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
you're doing it for your own glory.
yeah.
That's the way God is.
Self-righteousness is, I think of it as a hole that a man digs, and the more that he practices self-righteousness, the deeper that hole is, until he's dug a hole so deep there's nothing that can get him out of it unless he suddenly stops digging, looks around and realizes his condition, that he's in a hole that he can't get out of. That's his only hope, is to realize that.
And it's so deep he can't even throw the shovel full of dirt high enough to get it out of the hole anymore. So it just comes back down on him and piles him up.
Yeah. Yep.
Buries himself in death. Well, so if anybody wants to take it for next week, the book of Hebrews, meaning take on the book of Hebrews, the book of Hebrews is going to teach the Sabbath concept without the Ten Commandments. So if anybody wants to take on that challenge to prep for next week, Hebrews is pretty good.
Well, I'm pretty sure I heard Frank volunteering in this morning's meeting. So
I can't hear you guys.
you're breaking up. Must be going through a tunnel.
Houston, we're losing you.
Oh, come on, Frank. I know you know how to teach Sabbath school.
Yeah,
I've been to a few of yours, and they're good. So I would have no problem having you lead us if you wanted to. We're just putting friendly pressure on you.
All you got to do,
I could do some works, I guess.
Yeah. All you got to do, Frank, is have your verses ready. I can still sort of facilitate if you want. Just get us started.
Yep, I can do that.
All righty.
Cool.